Hi folks, we are back at Area 419. This is absolutely amazing. The machines are amazing, but the story I think is even cooler. And I asked John, would you be willing to talk a little bit more, not actually about the CNC machines, but more about the business side, the entrepreneurial side of how we got to where we are. Because we've had the chance to see factories, facilities, companies, frankly, all over the world. This is the best example of a story that we've gotten in some small way to follow along that journey of, and that journey is definitely not over, but it's pretty impressive. So I want to give a shout out and a thank you to John for being willing to share some of the insights of how he got started, some of those key steps along the way from a business and an entrepreneurial standpoint that led us to where we are today. How did we get here? Was this all mapped out perfectly in a business plan 6 years ago? 7 years ago?
Absolutely not. Not even close. I guess to give a little bit of background, I mean, we've talked about how things started before, but we'll go through it really quick. So 2010, started building rifles, custom rifles for people in the garage, just a hobby. Started out because I couldn't afford to pay somebody else to do the work for me. So that's really our grassroots, was building rifles. Fast forward 5-6 years to 2016, and that's when the business actually started to grow. Designed the Hellfire muzzle brake and patented that, all that good stuff. We started making them, I want to say August 2016, and put in a PO for 200 of them with a local machine shop. And before we ever actually had a finished product in our hands, we sold through 200 of them.
So you didn't have a CNC machine? You had obviously some manual equipment to do rifle smithing.
I take that back. End of 2015, we bought our TM2P.
Okay.
We were doing just barrel fluting, bolt fluting, things like that, but really no real products.
Okay.
So the Hellfire was kind of the real kickoff to everything.
Got it.
I think we were making loading blocks, things like that, just little not trinket items, but accessories for reloading, things like that.
I don't know if you realize this or not, but those small wins, I think, as an entrepreneur are huge. It's a relatively easy product. I mean, you could do it wrong, but it's an easier product to do it correctly versus the complications of a full-blown action, per se.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's huge to build confidence, revenue, and prove out your processes.
Yeah. And before that machine, I take that back. I touched the CNC once in college.
Okay.
I went to the University of Toledo for mechanical engineering, and we took a basics of CNC class. I enjoyed it, stayed after hours, kind of do some personal projects. Yeah. So that really inspired my love for machining. But before the Haas TM2P, I had never actually programmed a machine. So like you said, the loading blocks, a relatively simple product, really got my feet wet in the machining world, what's possible with it. So I think that inspired, well, what else can we do? Yeah. And so yeah, the first real product, the Hellfire, we couldn't even make in-house. We didn't have a lathe other than a manual clousing. And so yeah, we put in the PO for 200 of them, started pre-selling them on the website. They were gone before we ever actually shipped one. So
share more about that. When you say sold them on the website, I mean, if you create a website, people aren't just going to come.
Yeah, and actually that leads into another story. That's a pretty good one. Is Craig Arnzen, my director of sales and marketing, contacted me via email, I think, maybe Facebook Messenger, said, hey, I'm trying to buy a bolt knob from your website, and it's trash. Said, couldn't do anything on my website. He's like, do you want to trade a website for a rifle? I said, yeah, sounds great. So that was how that relationship started. He built me a great website off of WooCommerce. And yeah, I guess you don't just throw something on a website and that nobody knows about, and people find it. So that's where social media really came in. Is where we really started to develop the brand.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time posting in groups, things like that, to try to get the word out there.
You were doing that, or had you hired somebody?
Both of us. I was doing it, Craig was doing it. But back then it was basically just us. He didn't even live local to me.
Yeah.
He lived in Missouri, we're in Ohio. I had one guy helping me put stuff together, probably not even at that point. Just a local buddy that was a shooter and was looking for something to do. So
you're still what I would call a solopreneur at this point. You don't have a formal payroll and a real quote-unquote company.
No,
okay.
no, it was almost far from a real business at that point.
Yeah.
My QuickBooks was a disaster. Never had an accountant. I always did my own taxes. It's kind of scary to think back to those days, but.
And even then, did you have this conscious or subconscious like spark of thinking, hey, this is gonna blow up. I'm gonna create all these new products in this space. Obviously, there's probably some stuff in the whole PRS world that has complemented your business, perhaps outside of your control, which is great. But I mean, did you really think this was gonna happen? Or was it more just 1 month at a time, one product at a time?
Yeah, absolutely not. It was, the Hellfire grew out of almost necessity for me. I didn't like the way the other muzzle brakes attached, so I really just wanted to improve that. And I can actually remember sitting at dinner with my wife talking about the Hellfire and thinking, man, if we could sell like 200 of these things a year, it'd just be cool to have this little extra added income. And
oh, so you still had a day job?
Still had a day job.
Okay.
2016. Still had a day job, mechanical engineer designing UV phototherapy equipment. So I think when things started to get more real was when we put in the second PO for the Hellfire for I think another 200 or maybe 500 pieces. And this was probably now later 2016 when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to do this as a hobby anymore.
Yeah.
So that was when I decided to quit my job January 1st of 2017 and take it on full time. So at that point, I had the one part-time employee, and Craig was doing kind of marketing stuff on the side while he still had a real job in Missouri. So.
Oh, he was also. Oh, so he was also employed and not even local to you at this point.
Correct. Yeah.
See, I love this. We've talked a lot about leveraging services like Upwork and consultants and third parties, or even job shops. People get still worried about losing margin if they're not making the product themselves. And sometimes, good grief, you can always bring it in-house later, prove it out, build confidence, get the things in motion.
Yep.
The thing you've done that I've not seen as common is you realized up front and early on how important it was to have somebody to both help complement your skill sets, but also just spend time marketing and getting the word out there. Good grief.
Yeah,
we all love machining, but there's a whole other element that really matters to this story.
Yeah, brand recognition is probably one of the most important things I think you can do, aside from having product in stock, and those kind of complement each other. You need somebody that can pump the product, get people to know about who you are, but you also have to keep the products in stock. In this called Amazon world that we live in now, if somebody can't get something 1 or 2 days later, they might go somewhere else. So that's kind of driven a lot of the decision-making process as far as the business growth was me realizing, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this myself. I need to hire people I can trust to make decisions without having to come to me with every little question. So that leads into Craig. While he was still just doing it on the side, he was taking workload off of me so I could focus on product design, product development, and at the time I was actually making the products, changing the parts myself. So
was it hard or easy to let go, or just allow somebody you didn't necessarily know to develop a part of your business that's very important?
Yeah, it's hard to remember back. I think it just kind of happened organically. The great thing about, specifically, we'll talk about Craig here, was that he was a shooter. He knew everything about what I was doing already. He wasn't just a sales and marketing guy that didn't know anything about shooting. So it was great to have somebody that could answer technical questions as well as do the marketing side of things. And I think that's kind of hard to find a lot of times. And I mean, I guess luckily for me, it kind of fell in my lap when he told me my website was trash and I needed a new one. So,
So did you have to sell him on coming on full board, full time, and I suppose relocating?
that didn't happen until 2 years later,
Oh, wow.
I believe. So I think Christmas, the day after Christmas 2018, I think, he picked his family up and moved out here. So we had grown quite a bit by that point. I think it was a little more obvious that things were here to stay, that we were at the point where it couldn't be done remotely anymore.
Got it.
Up until then, it was just a lot of social media pushing, keeping the website up to date, answering emails, all that stuff. All that kind of stuff can be done remotely, but you don't have a real pulse on what's going on day to day inside the company. Hey, do we have this in stock? You can't just go look for it. You got to ask me to go look for it, that kind of thing. So,
Right.
and by that point, we probably had 3 or 4 employees, and I had hired my director of operations, Justin, fall of 2017. So that was the point when I realized, all right, I can't keep changing parts all day myself.
Yeah.
If we want to keep developing products, I can't be spending the time designing like I need to if I'm out just changing parts constantly on the mills. So
were you of the mindset that you were hiring to get ahead of anticipated growth and needs, or were you, like we so often hear, realizing, oh man, I should have hired this person 2 months ago?
Yeah, I think that was at that point he was actually just a CNC operator.
Justin.
He took over my duties of changing parts,
Okay.
so I could get back to design and business related activities. And he quickly moved out of that once we realized we needed real operators, and we had a whole side of the business logistically that couldn't be handled as it was. And I think the best advice I can give, and I've heard it before, is if you make a decision to do something, let's say retroactively, it's too late.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that because if you don't, it's risky.
Yeah.
The first VF4 that I bought, the Haas salesman just walked in the door one day. I wasn't even looking for a machine. Introduced himself, and I bought a machine that day. We didn't actually need it, but I could see the potential for it. At that point, it was just, I think we can do these things faster, more productive, not necessarily we need the capacity of an extra machine. So I think making those risky decisions is the best way to grow more quickly, because if you're doing things retroactively, you're always just playing catch up.
I think that's the interesting way to juxtapose it. I know that I come from a little bit more of a risk adverse personality, which is not always great to be an entrepreneur who doesn't enjoy that. I think what's interesting is when you compare it against the fact that if you aren't willing to feed the business, if you aren't willing to invest in people and in growth, it can actually be your own demise.
Yeah.
And you made a comment before we hit the record button of, hey, you got to have product in stock, and you just mentioned it a second ago, and that's a really interesting. If you can't feed your own demand, you'll shoot yourself in the foot, pun intended.
Yeah, and I've seen people in this industry and other industries kind of do that, just not let go of control, not invest in the resources needed to keep product on hand.
Yeah.
And they have good products. They would probably sell more of them if they just had them on hand, and if they could spend more time doing things to help grow the business instead of running machines. I love running the machines, but my time is better spent doing other things, and I realized that early on, and I think that was a pretty key part of our growth.
So you went to undergrad for mechanical engineering, you worked as a mechanical engineer, you obviously had a passion for machining, even if it was only nights and weekends in college. Talk about did you have any formal business training or experience, or perhaps was your dad a business person that taught you entrepreneurial, anything that's unusual there, or have you figured it out as you go?
My dad was definitely, and he still plays a huge part in helping me on the business side. He was the vice president for the Andersons grain division.
Okay.
So on their, not their retail side, but the grain side. So he had a very good business mind.
Uh-huh.
I've always been pretty terrible at it. Like I said, with the books being just a disaster. So once he started to realize that we were growing, I leaned on him a lot to help me there. We found a retired CPA to start cleaning up the books. I would say without my dad being here, we would probably be in a lot more disarray.
Uh-huh.
He, like you said, lives more on the risk-averse side than I'm the more risk taker. I'm all right buying something even if I can't quite afford it.
Okay.
But he keeps me in check, so.
Is he a formal part of Area 419, or is he just your dad who picks up the phone when you call him?
Yeah, pretty much my dad. Pick up the phone, call him. He's
Okay.
retired.
Yeah.
He builds I can't see over there. He builds our crates for
Yeah.
shipping stuff. At the old shop, he did all our electrical wiring
Okay.
when we added machines, because I didn't like hiring electricians to do it because he knew how to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he does have a company credit card, but he doesn't get paid. So yeah, definitely, that's been kind of a invisible thing that a lot of people don't see behind the scenes here that's helped me, is having people guiding me
Yeah.
on the business side, because I really struggle in the business sense of things. I know what it means to grow a business and sales and
Right.
cost of goods and all that stuff, but there's a lot that goes on the business side that just takes up time from doing things. So having somebody that can do those things for you, help guide you, talk to banks, because what I've learned is having a good bank on your side
Yeah.
is huge. I never really realized it. We banked with Fifth Third, a big corporate bank. I would try to get a loan for a machine or something, and they didn't care about me. Unless you're doing $10, $20 million a year with a bank that size, they don't care. So that's a good piece of advice I can give, is find a good local bank that that really cares about you, even if you're spending $20 with them or
Yeah.
$1 million with them. And it makes things very easy.
Yeah.
Now we've gotten to the point where we have good business credit, but if I want to buy a machine, I don't have to spend 3 days filling out paperwork and all these things.
Right.
I just call them and be like, hey, I want to buy this machine. Are we good for it? And they say, yeah, here's the money. So
I want to back you up. It's a great point. I think a lot of folks think a bank is just this entity that has all the money, and you just talk to a computer or a system.
Yeah.
And it's a very much a relationship business. And the more you can get to know a banker, a person,
Yeah.
who, frankly, from my experience, may switch banks, and they'll just bring you along with them.
Yeah.
That is worth, another pun intended, it's worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, whether it's a line of credit or it's a financing or just helping understand that not only is it important, but the time to ask and develop that relationship is before you need it.
yeah. Yeah, what I remember about the bigger corporate banks is, unrelated to business, just doing a mortgage on the house.
Yeah.
I talked to 2 or 3 different people during the process because their turnover is so high.
Yeah.
So you can never actually develop a relationship with a person with that size of a bank. So yeah, it's been a very important thing, and even just asking them business questions or
Right.
letting them do all the legwork for you, because they work for you in the end.
Right.
Don't let them tell you you need to do all the legwork to fill out paperwork. They should just hand you a bunch of papers to sign.
Yeah.
And that's time. When you get to the point where you're growing a business, time is really money. So
And when you look at the questions and concerns, and I use the word insecurities because I think it's the right word. There are insecurities I have as a leader, and sometimes you forget that, hey, if I can only find somebody who talks to every business and knows all the answers to all these questions. It's a guy like a banker who sees the books, who sees the operations, who knows other people in your community. And it's great to pick up the phone and say, hey, am I crazy? Is this, am I expecting the right answer or the right outcome for there? And they're not going to overshare other people's personal information, but it can be a great sounding board for some of those tough questions.
Yeah, and you could spend hours and hours trying to research something that they probably know the answer to. Case in point would be probably related to this is SBA loans. I knew nothing about them. Somebody in the business mentioned it to me one time. I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll look into it. So instead of spending a bunch of time on the SBA website researching it, I just called the bank and they said, oh yeah, we'll look into that for you. And they did all the legwork. And it's a great option for especially starting businesses. If you're not taking advantage of what the government has to offer as far as small business loans, it's a big deal.
Is that, if you don't mind me asking, is that part of the story of how we moved from the barn to this building?
It is a part. It actually happened midway was when I found out about it. So it wasn't the only reason that it happened or was able to happen, but it helps. And to share, probably the biggest thing is they only require 10% down versus most banks will want 20 to 25%. So it requires a little less cash up front, and it's a fixed rate for 20 years. That's lower than a bank. So
wow. So that part of it's through the SBA.
Through the SBA, yeah. And they won't finance the whole project on anything, building, machines, or anything. They'll finance 40% of it.
Okay.
But that point reduction in interest makes a big deal over 20 years or something. So, and
we're going to do a different video, folks, with Jon and Area419, including an updated shop tour coming soon. And we're going to do an interview with Jon that I'm super excited about with his advice on when you should think about making a big move in your life, like leaving your day job. But I thought I'd wrap up today with talking about a real quick teaser of we're in this new building today. You're kind of in this mid-move, mid-story. What are you doing well? What keeps you up at night?
I guess less things keep me up at night now than early on. The business really stressed me out back when we were really trying to grow. I don't want to say it's on cruise control now, but if I take a week off, the business can still operate, and that helps a lot. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just having good people supporting you is, it's priceless. We've got 19 employees now, and they're all great employees. I don't think a lot of companies can say that they really value every single employee they have. And then part of that is treating your employees well. And that goes as far, in my opinion, as the building that we're standing in right now. We could have built a building the same square footage for probably less than half the price, but it probably wouldn't have been as cool of a place to work at. So I think things like that go a long way.
And even if I may add, even before you built this building, which is kind of that big move from, effectively an oversized pole barn to this, even before this shop, you had hired two key folks, or those folks that stepped into key roles that you mentioned before we hit the record button today, really were making major decisions in the operations and the direction of this company, which is something that we don't see a lot from companies that are, say, sub 10 employees at that point.
Yeah, and we were sub 10 employees when, and I trust them to make nearly all decisions. I still make all the decisions as far as machine buying, but that's because that's my ball game.
That's fun.
That's what I like doing.
Right.
But where should we buy this material? How are we going to source this stuff? We got to ship a bunch of stuff LTL. Let's find the best rates. Talking to UPS to get the best rates on shipping. All these kinds of things are stuff that a small business owner would normally do, and I've never had to do.
Yeah.
The other greatest part, I took a phone call from a customer yesterday because they found my cell phone number, but I haven't taken a customer service phone call in 3 years.
But there's still good customer service. Your point being, it gets handled not through
I
you.
haven't had to do it.
Yeah.
I'll take calls that relate to me, but if somebody's got a question on, hey, I placed an order, what's the status, or what muzzle brake should I buy, those kind of questions, we have people that can answer those questions all day long.
Got it.
And that's key as well. I definitely still know business owners that are taking all the technical phone calls all day, and that kills productivity as far as growth and design and production. So
there's this there's a romantic idea of bootstrapping. I consider myself a bootstrapper, where it's like I'm going to work harder than I need to work, and I'm going to handle this myself, and I'm going to not overextend myself and hire, which again, that's kind of my default wiring. But you start to appreciate the opportunity cost, how much you rob yourself of product development, of real business growth, of improving fixtures, of stuff that's the stuff that you, Jon Addis, should be doing, versus stuff that you can build a system around to allow other people to grow into that.
Exactly. And I think that's really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I enjoyed our conversation. It's great to have people. As an entrepreneur, you've got to build a network of people and a team, and it doesn't have to be, I don't think you would ever answer, oh yeah, John Saunders is on my team, but in some respects, hey, it's that ability to pick up that phone and ask a quick question, or people that you can know casually to bounce things off of. It really is the sum of the parts when it comes to building out an endeavor. I commend you. It's an awesome story. I'm glad to be a small part of it and sort of being able to see it, and looking forward to our next shop tour.
Yeah, me as well.
Cool. Hope you folks learned something. Hope you enjoyed. Take care. See you soon.